too much, huh?
See it? We should be ready to go now.
Right, it appears we are live, so I'll call the meeting of the Finance Committee for Tuesday, June the 22nd to order. Look to the agenda. Are there any changes, additions?
None.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I'll move the agenda be approved as presented then. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the minutes of the May 4th Finance meeting, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? And opposed? I'm going to call that approved unanimously. And moving on then to item D1, the 2021 financial report year to date as at April the 30th. Ms. Richardson.
Good morning, members of the Finance Committee. I'm here to provide an update on the year-to-date results as of April 30th. I don't have a presentation for this first agenda item. I'll just be speaking to the highlights from the report. Many of the year-to-date variances at this point are due to timing and are expected to realign with the budget throughout the rest of the year. Additionally, due to COVID-19, some assumptions that were made at the time the 2021 budget was prepared have played out differently this year. So there are a few items that administration has identified and would like to bring to Finance Committee's attention. First, both planning fees and business registry revenue continue to exceed budget because of the general level of development and economic activity in the town. Snow and ice control is lower than budget due to lower than expected required expenditures in the last part of this past winter. The final variance will be dependent on how November and December play out. We do have money budgeted in those months, so we do expect most of this variance will flow through to year end. Engineering permits and fines exceed the current budget, primarily from permits for the Gateway at TSMV subdivision application. Gas and electrical franchise fees are trending higher than budget, and that's due to greater volumes of gas and power over the winter as the main driver. Photo radar fine revenue is continuing to trend lower, mainly due to COVID impacts. And year-to-date payroll savings, excluding any COVID impacts, is $485,000 versus our annual budget assumption of $700,000, and we'll continue to monitor that throughout this year. The biggest example of how some of those COVID assumptions have played out differently than we anticipated at the time of the budget was the continued closure of the recreation facilities. The financial impacts of the revenue lost in this area have mainly been managed through corresponding expense reductions. Overall, through the end of April, recreation results were $62,000 worse than we had anticipated. Based on the most recent forecasts that have been completed by the Recreation Department, the impact for the whole year is expected to be around $350,000 lower than we expected. Also, through the end of April, $199,000 had been spent in COVID expenditures from that COVID contingency. Your agenda package includes service area specific financial summaries that provide more detailed variance explanations and actual results through the end of April. So that was all I was going to cover in terms of the highlights, and I believe I do have Mr. Irwin here with me as well, and we're both happy to address any questions that the Finance Committee may have at this time.
Thanks very much. That was concise. Yeah, no surprises given all that's been going on. Are there any questions from members of the Finance Committee? I have a question or a sort of thought, and maybe this is the right place to insert it or not, but in the first bullet under the discussion of planning fees, and it references the increase, the report references the unexpected increase in planning fees. And I know our planning department is working full out and one might say overwork. And I don't know, this is, I guess, a question for senior admin, Lisa or somebody. What's the current thoughts in regards to beefing up planning department? any opportunity for that, given the increased planning fees? Ms. Smithers?
So I would say currently our focus is on staff complement that we have and finding efficiencies in process where possible in that regard. I think your question as to moving forward, there's a couple of parts there. One is looking at fee review and right sizing the fees to the level of resource required to process the permits. But again, we need some more work on the efficiencies in the process before we can get to that and do that in a defensible manner. The other part of your question in terms of resource complement and planning generally would come into the next discussion, which is looking forward to the budget for future years.
Yeah, I recognize I could have waited for that report, but it was a thought that came out of reading this D1 report. But so we can have that discussion under D2 then. Thanks. Are there any other questions for Ms. Richardson as related to the report on D1? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Looking at the impact of the recreation fees, and you're predicting that it'll be likely $350,000 less than what we thought we could collect. Last year, we were significantly higher than that. And this year, we're already being impacted for 6 months. So our 6-month impact, we're already feeling that because we haven't had reliable recreation services due to closures. Did we modify the budget to make it less impactful, that our closures aren't going to impact us as much over on an annual basis?
From what I recall, at the time the budget was prepared, and Dr. Cottle can help me out with this one, but I do believe as much as we hadn't necessarily assumed that we would experience the closures that we've unfortunately experienced for the first half of 2021, I think we were more conservative with our revenue projections for 2021. Not, again, assuming facilities might be open, but knowing that likely memberships might not come back immediately in the same way we would have thought that they would have, say, for 2020, no COVID. So I think some of the factors of COVID had been considered, not necessarily closures, but we were, I believe, more conservative with our revenue projections, knowing that those impacts would likely continue, again, not to the extent we've experienced, but we had taken some of that into account, is my understanding.
That's absolutely correct. And Council, you may recall that Council also, part of the budget was a transfer from, oh, now I'm forgetting the name. What's the
$1 million from tax stabilization.
Thank you, Rick, from tax stabilization. And you'll see that in the transfers another line. We had assumed that there would be not be the usual revenue. And that was, at the time all those assumptions were made, we were actually open. We did the best we could at the time of the budget. That it's a very conservative recreation revenue budget. And now that we're open again, we just opened again yesterday, we'll just have to see what happens with membership and uptake and whether or not there's another closure in the fall. It's very hard to predict.
Okay, thank you.
Just to reference that roughly $300,000 number, we also have to consider the facility savings in the facilities department versus strictly recreation. And on page 20 right now, facilities is better by about $350,000, both in payroll through the rec center and Elevation Place, and power and gas and supplies and those type of things. So it's kind of even when you look at it both together. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, we have been significantly impacted for the first half of the year. So if we can come out with that good of a number, that'll be good for us in the long term. So hopefully we can resume. Thank you.
I'm just curious, in reviewing all of the roll-ups, I mean, expectedly, many departments show decrease in salary, wage, and benefits, given what's been going on. But have you, what's the thought as we move into normal operations and things start to gear up? Do you think it's likely that by the end of the year we'll have corrected, or not corrected, but the net decrease, net variance will be as significant as it has been, or do you think that'll balance out through the rest of the year?
I can try to respond to that one.
Thanks.
It is a bit of $1 million question, but we certainly are trending to meet, if not exceed, the budgeted slippage that we had. We are seeing some vacancy in positions taking a little bit longer to fill vacancies, and so that certainly is impacting what's happening here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then delays, you know, some of that will be also with facility closures and laid off staff. That has an impact on that salary, wage, and benefit line as well, which Mr. Irwin spoke to on the facility side, and we also will see on the recreation side. And so the timing of some of our position filling is also a little bit different. But I'm predicting that we will be ahead of that budgeted number. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we'll make a note of that prediction.
We're about if you
Didn't
take
say how much.
if you take the effect of recreation and facilities out of the equation, we're halfway there. And it is halfway through the year right now,
Right.
to our budgeted slippage of 700,000. So there probably won't be much gain to that. But
Right. Okay. Well, we'll learn more later in the year. Thanks very much. Are there any other questions in for Ms. Richardson in regards to this report? Seeing none, we'll move on then to item D2, the budget development direction. Ms. Rogers and Ms. Richardson.
So the next item we have is with regards to our budget development direction for the upcoming preparations of the 2022 budget. And if you'll bear with me, I do have a presentation for this one. Hopefully everyone is seeing my slides.
Right.
Perfect. So consistent with how we approached this last year, administration is only seeking direction from Finance Committee on the parameters not otherwise included in policy, such as the indicative tax rate, to prepare our 3-year operating and 5-year capital plans within. As such, our recommendation is that the Finance Committee direct administration as follows: to prepare preliminary operating and capital budgets for 2022 that do not exceed a 5% tax increase over the 2021 budget, and prepare preliminary operating budget plans for 2023 and 2024 that do not exceed a 5% tax increase in each year. Stumbling over the years there a bit, sorry. We would like to start with a higher level view of our current environment. Some of these items create challenges and some create opportunity. For some political considerations going into 2022 would include the relationships between municipal, provincial, and federal governments as we hopefully start to emerge from these pandemic circumstances, primarily around actions and approach taken during the pandemic. The impact of servicing costs on national and provincial debt taken for that pandemic response, and particularly how that may impact taxation policies and potentially grant availability going forward. Potential shifts in residential, non-residential tax splits, and continued or future opportunities for shared services with other municipalities. With regards to economic considerations, full economic recovery is likely a long road ahead, and that recovery also hasn't been equal across all sectors. We've seen high income sectors recovering at a faster rate than others, like the service sector. And similarly, employment recovery is still ongoing. Many small businesses continue to struggle with decreased revenues. Low interest rates make borrowing inexpensive, but conversely, our investment portfolios aren't earning as much. And finally, indications are that the housing market is expected to stay strong. On the technological side, we've seen increased normalization of working from home and remote work and how that may impact workforces going forward. We expect to see continued demand for online services and participation as people have become used to and may now prefer or expect these types of options. And finally, for the social and demographic considerations, there is still lingering uncertainty regarding potential variants like the Delta variants and the potential for a fourth wave. Obviously, there's careful tracking of vaccination rates and rollouts. And it also remains to be seen what changes from the past 15 months will remain going forward. Overall, we expect that the pressure to do more will continue, whether that's continued expectations with regards to social supports, business supports, economic development, and some of the digital and online services provided during COVID, or pressure to quickly get back to normal. And we expect that pressure to continue to do more, but exist with less resources to do so. There is continued uncertainty around what that growth, what grant revenues might look like, as I spoke to earlier, our program and service revenues and growth in all of those items. So moving on from that kind of high level to scan to the specific budget process for this year, we are looking to return to a one-year budget approval for 2022, primarily because the council strategic plan does expire at the end of 2022. Once we have that new council strategic plan in place, we may in future years look to get back to those two-year budget approvals we previously have been doing. With regards to the timing, we're also hoping to get back to our regular schedule of final budget approval in December. That really helps us with planning for the upcoming year, having that approval in place a little bit earlier. The interim budget this year and the delay in the approval was really meant to be a short-term response, given the massive uncertainty we were currently dealing with COVID, and now we're hoping to return to kind of our regularly scheduled programming. We're also not expecting at this time to include a COVID contingency in our 2022 budget. With regards to what we already know, as you saw, we are recommending a 5% tax increase, but as the Finance Committee may recall, the tax increase currently in our adopted plan for 2022 is at 9%. So in order to get down to 5%, things that are currently in our operating plan would need to be removed. A 1% tax increase is approximately $264,000. We are anticipating some additional revenue from new growth consistent with the last few years. Our average COLA is at 1.5%, and that's the average CPI from Calgary that we use for that calculation. It has recently been trending higher, but the 1.5% is the average that we use. But we've seen building construction price indexes rising, which I did want to highlight, particularly in the first quarter here of 2021. And while that's not operating specifically, it does impact the affordability of our capital program and all of the projects we have going on overall. Again, longer term, we're also still dealing with the phasing in of increased policing and fire costs, and not so much for 2022, but going forward, we'll also have new debt servicing costs. So in 2022, related to the fire hall and other projects, we're slated to take 20 million in debt. So again, just to speak briefly to the years consistent with prior years, the MGA requirements stipulate that council must adopt an operating budget for each calendar year and a capital budget for each calendar year. And we need to do those 3-year operating plans and 5-year capital plans. So we would be looking to have approved 22 operating and capital budgets, and then we'll be adopting 2022 to 2024 operating plan and 2022 to 2026 capital plan. Couple last items, similar to prior years, we will be asking our partners and affiliates to provide their 3-year budget requests to facilitate that 3-year operating plan. And similar with prior years, we would be planning to hear from and learn about partners and affiliates at upcoming CAL meetings to understand the work that those groups are doing and to put some context around the budget asks that they'll be bringing forward. Again, just briefly going back to the salary, wages, and benefits, we will be adjusting the pay grids for COLA, and our current estimate, as I'd said, is at 1.5%, and that helps to minimize that risk of those rate differentials once those compensation studies are done. So we use that 12-month period from July 2020 to June 2021. So that's why it's a bit of an estimate until we have the final June number. At this point, again, we're expecting that 1.5%. And in the preparation of the 2 additional years for the operating plan, we use that same rate. So I talked a little bit about getting back to our regular timeframes, and this is roughly what that would look like. This is included, a preliminary budget schedule was included as attachment 2 in your package. So that would be, I believe, 26 of your agenda package. So overall, we'd be looking to start developing the budget once we have the guidance from today's meeting over July and August, finalizing kind of our drafts in September. It would go through an administrative review through October, and we'd be bringing it for Finance Committee meetings for presentation and debate in November, ultimately with the goal of final council approval in December, tentatively scheduled for December 14th. So that concludes everything I was going to speak about with the budget process at this time. And again, this was the recommendation that we put forward. I'm happy to take any questions that the Finance Committee may have at this time.
Great, thanks very much. I'm sorry, do you mind putting that second last screen back up, the projected timeline? Just want to get that clear both in my mind and in the public's mind. So this Finance Committee, after today's direction, it's not likely that the Finance Committee will play a role again until after the election. Is that how I'm understanding this?
That'd be correct.
Right. So through the summer, admin will be developing the budget according to the direction that you received today and bringing that back for consideration after the election to the new council. Great, thanks for that. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. We have considered or thought about or talked about doing something like a service area review. Is there some place in this process that such a exercise could be inserted so that when we look at services that the community is expecting, you outlined a number of things in your slides that you thought were changing with community expectations, but in giving us the opportunity to align ourselves with those expectations, is there a place in the process where we could insert a service area review?
I can answer that. That's a great question. And really the timing for that would be to start in 2022. It would make sense to align that with the new strategic plan that sets the direction of council's priorities for the next 4 years. And so the way that we would see that unfolding is including in the 2022 budget some allowance for service level review, completing the new strategic plan with the newly elected council early in the year in 2022, and then beginning that more intense service level review. That is likely to be quite a lengthy process, and we are still trying to figure out how to streamline that, but it is a very involved process. Having said that, we recognizing that we're looking already at a 4% decrease that we're going to need to find. We need to take a service level lens to what we bring forward to the Finance Committee in November, because there simply isn't 4% worth of easy cuts within that budget. Service levels would need to be impacted at that level. Again, 1% increase is $264,000. So we're talking about close to $1 million that we need to find in that budget. Did that answer your question, Councillor Sanford?
Yes, I'm just thinking about the timing. So what I thought I heard you say was early in the next year with the strategic planning process.
The strategic planning process would be early in the next year, and then the service review would need to follow that. So I would anticipate that not to occur until later in 2022. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. And thanks for that question, Councillor Sanford, because I already have a motion prepared around that. That's something that I have been talking about for a while, as you might recall. And so would it be, the process would be then that a terms of reference would need to be brought forward so that administration and council agree on scope of the service review. And then as Councillor Sanford asked, we would do, or the council of the day rather, would do their strategic planning. And then would you see the terms of reference coming after the strategic planning process?
I think so. I think it would come after, once that next set of priorities has been established for that term of council for that next 4 years, because I think that would dictate or certainly help inform what that service review should look like.
Right. And it's not something I know that we've done in the last 10 years that I've been on council. And so it's certainly, I think that with all of the additions we've seen as a community over the last decade, as well as with COVID and the changes we've experienced, and higher levels of service in some places and lower levels of service in other places, as well as unfortunately the layoffs that occurred, I think it would be a really important process to help us get through the next bit of budgeting. And I actually think it might be a valuable process to be done once per term. Much like many of those sort of processes that we have that are not necessarily great to do every year, but once per term really helps you get focused as a council and understand what your budget, because of course your budget is a reflection of your community priorities. So would you like to see a motion with regards to that? Because I do have one prepared that would ensure that that the service review is looked at least as part of 2022. How would we do that?
I'm hearing that it's already on admin's work plan,
Is
but
it?
that's
Oh,
what
okay.
I understood. Ms. DeSoto?
Yeah, I think we're hearing you and certainly council's interest in a service level review. As Ms. Rogers just explained, it needs a budget and resources assigned to it. But this is your opportunity as a current finance committee and current elected council to make sure we put it in the budget. Because we'll have a new council who may choose differently in the fall when they approve a budget. So
absolutely, yeah, and they could choose to reject the idea of a service level review when that new council comes forward. But I guess I feel like the importance of that seed of if new councillors have never even heard of it before, then that seed is there, and they have the option to actually reject the idea of a service review or embrace it and make it part of their budget.
Yeah, so I don't think it hurts. It's sort of a belt and suspenders type approach. If you would like to make a motion that directs to include a service level review or the resources to conduct a service level review in the 2022 budget preparation, that certainly would be consistent with what we're hearing you say.
Okay. If you just give me a moment, I will edit what I have, if that's okay.
Yeah, there may be other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, definitely.
And just for the heck of it, I'll raise the question I raised in the last report discussion around, the question is around any discussions that may be taking place at senior admin around doing an interim beefing up of resources in departments like planning that are being challenged with the workload. I know that mid-year additions to staffing is not the norm, but I'm just curious whether there's been any discussion within the planning department around that need. It might be that I'm misreading the need entirely. So, Ms. Smithers?
So the discussion has definitely happened in planning. In fairness, though, I would say that planning is not the only department at the town that's facing that issue of workload management. I think that those discussions are happening in multiple departments across the town. And that's part of where Ms. Rogers is saying the 5% indicative tax rate that we'll be working towards will come with cuts to not only service levels, but in some cases, potentially services for 2020. Because the workload management is a theme across the town, and that will have repercussions as we produce a proposed operating and capital budget for 2022. So yes, absolutely, there is discussion in planning around the need for resource, and I would say that is not an exclusive discussion to the planning department.
Okay, well, that's great. I'll just, we'll wait in here. Thanks. Councillor, Ms. DeSoto?
Yeah, just to add to that and build on what Ms. Smithers was saying in response when you first asked the question, is that one of the unique attributes of the planning department is they charge fees directly for the services they provide. So there is the intent to do a fee review and match that fee to service levels, and potentially have a discussion with council about the administrative flexibility to ramp up staff as fees increase, etc. So that, we have a similar type structure in recreation where we can add new recreation staff if program fees cover the costs of those staff, that type of thing. So, but Ms. Smithers spoke to the need to get processes and efficiencies matched to the fees, and that's something we're working on.
No, that's really good to hear. That was really what I had in mind, was just what you suggested, recognizing the increased permit fee revenue and addressing the workload through those increased fees. So that's all I was asking about, was whether those discussions were ongoing, and they are. So thanks for that. Are there other questions at this time, or Councillor McCallum, do you have I guess that would be a third motion. We'll consider the first two motions, or the one motion that's in the report, and then if you have another motion to bring forward, we can consider that afterwards.
Yep, Ms. Hyde has it, so we can go through the first two. Thank you.
Ready to
Perfect.
go.
Are there any other questions or discussion at this time on the report, budget development
I have a
direction?
question.
Yes, Councillor Comfort.
So my question is, would there be any opportunity, either formal or informal, to talk about terms of reference for such a service review? Like maybe have administration give us a piece of learning about it, because I'd really like to know that piece. So to understand what the terms of reference would be.
So
Ms.
I
DeSoto?
actually included as part of my motion asking for terms of reference to come forward, but that wouldn't be to this council, that would be to the future council.
Okay.
Ms. Rogers, did you have something, or Ms. DeSoto, something in response to that question?
Well, in my mind, because I haven't turned it completely to what that would look like, but it would likely be a capital budget request. So we do those project justification sheets at capital budget time. We would outline the scope and sort of the scale. A detailed terms of reference is typically developed prior to going to the market, right? So when we're issuing a call for proposals, et cetera, to assist with that service level review, I don't see it being done completely in-house. Obviously, it would need participation from in-house staff. So we're going to have to make sure it's factored into work plans of various departments. But there are various levels of scope that can be involved in service level reviews. There's right down to time and motion kind of studies, which I don't know that that's the level of detail we want to get to. But we'd have to figure that out. So the first step would be a project justification sheet to give it a budget. And then following that, we would do a detailed terms of reference to go to the market to assist us with it. And I don't know, Ms. Rogers and Ms. Richardson, if you have anything to add to that. No. So
just before we get, thanks, Ms. So before we get to the motions, then Councillor McCallum, is your motion worded in such a fashion that it would essentially be setting the process up as Ms. DeSoto has described? rather than being very specific?
My motion's quite open, I guess. You can determine that, and I'd be happy to take friendly
Sure.
amendments, because I know everybody has a very different idea as to what they'd like to see.
Yeah.
So why don't we go through the first two motions, and then we can look at the
Yeah.
third and massage it as required.
Okay, it's always nice to have admin's input on a motion before we get to the council phase, so. Have you had that? Did you run your motion past the administration earlier?
No, I did not, but I did have discussions with Ms. Richardson yesterday with regards to what we are proposing today.
Great. All right, then, if there's no other questions at this time for administration, I'll then move the Finance Committee direct administration as follows. To prepare preliminary operating and capital budgets for 2022 that do not exceed a 5% tax increase over the 2021 budget, and prepare preliminary operating budget plans for 2023 and 2024 that do not exceed a 5% tax increase in each year. And with the motion on the table, I'll speak in support of the motion. A lot of work takes place as councils transition. We've been doing this work for years, and I think are to a large extent up to speed with long-term plans. But it's important that administration have this direction so that they can do the work to prepare for a new council to not only get the approvals ultimately that are required by the new council, but will be able to prepare a new council for these discussions. So these motions will certainly help set that in place. So happy to support the motion. Is there other discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'd be happy to support these motions, understanding that these are draft plans that are going to be brought back to the next council. We say this every year that we're going to have a tough budget year, et cetera, but I really do believe with the cuts that we're seeing from the provincial government to our MSI funding, that these next few years in transition are going to be incredibly difficult. And so I believe that having as much information and working through these budgets as early as possible is quite prudent, so that we can try to understand what the fallback is going to be on our community and the members of our community. I appreciate this being brought back in a timely fashion for us to review, for us to approve for the next council to review. Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too will support this direction. I think it's important for us to always be considerate of going forward with our taxpayers and trying to figure out where the right balance is for the community. And so I do appreciate that we're looking at this as 5% increase as a goal. And of course, if we go through a service level review and we realize that we have to do something different, that can be adjusted. So we can look at this as a goal and work toward it and do a good job for our community.
For the discussion on the motion, seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Councillor McCallum, you have a motion to put on the table.
Yes, the clerk has a copy of it.
Yes, right away.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde. Directing administration to bring forward a service level review. And actually I have a question. Is it considered called a service level review or a service area review? I've heard those two terms used interchangeably. Do you happen to know, Mayor Barman?
I would see them as interchangeable, but.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just use service level review, and if anybody has a big problem with it, we can discuss it. Forward a service level review as part of the 2022 budget, and to bring back a terms of reference to Finance Committee for approval after completing the 2022 strategic planning.
Okay, great. And we understand that the 2022 strategic planning will take place after the election. So it's not specific in timing. It's basically.
I see it happening sometime between strategic planning and the budget approval, somewhere in the middle there.
Right. Right. And well, that I think the motion is reflective of the discussion we've been having, certainly, and is broad enough to allow admin and the new council to move forward with that. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I would be happy to support your motion, Councillor McCallum. I think this is a good way for us to reflect on what we're doing. And also, we have a lot of groups that lobby us for different levels of service. And every time those levels of service are considered, they have impacts on the operation, because we can't just absorb new levels of service every time we're asked for them. So I think looking at the service level review concept will give us an idea of how much impact that has on our operations and how much we can actually deliver from our size and our community. We are still a small town, and there are a lot of things that we do that seem quite impactful for the community, but we can't do everything. So we have to be always looking at what we can do and what we can do well. And so I think this is a good way to approach that.
Further discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman, and thank you for the preliminary support I've received from my colleagues. This is something that when we got COVID thrown at us, something that came to mind that as we work through our budgets moving forward, that we would really want to look at. I also think that, I know for me, and I can't speak for my colleagues, that, the budget process has been one of my favorite processes, believe it or not. And I think what I love about it is that every single time we go through it, I learn something new about the services and the offerings that our community, that our staff at the town of Canmore provide to our community. And I also believe that not only in re-educating or educating every year current sitting councillors, it'll be an excellent education for anyone new that's elected in that year. And I think they'll be given a really in-depth understanding as to the services and the operations that we provide. So I appreciate your support as council. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, thank you for this motion, Councillor McCallum. I agree with you that this is a good process for particularly new councillors to go through, because it really points up the fact that there are things that we have to do, i.e. police services, clean water, all of that stuff. And then there are things that we choose to do. And the things that we choose to do also have a very heavy impact on the money that we have available and the cost of it, the taxes and so forth. So I think it's a good exercise for the council and for the community. So thank you again.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I believe that brings us to the end of this meeting. In which case I will move that the Finance Committee be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Adios.